Welcome back to another episode of Real Results with Coach Joe. I'm your host, Joe Villegas. This is the program where we help you to improve your health, increase your wealth, and live a more fulfilling life. And I've got a very special guest with me today. He's the CEO founder of MSO Co, Mark O'Donnell. Mark, welcome to the show, brother.
Pleasure. Thanks, Joe. Thanks
Awesome
for having me.
You on. Yeah, of course. So, Mark, we're going to talk about a topic today that I know absolutely nothing about. So I'm excited to get educated, excited to hear your story, and excited to share it with the viewers. And that is a topic of cannabis, specifically as it relates to wellness, which I feel like you don't hear much about, right? You hear like the partying scene, maybe the negative side of drug use. But in your case, you've got a very interesting story of how cannabis kind of in a way like saved your life in some instances, right? So let's start there. Let's start with your story and how it came to be a part of your life in a wellness aspect.
That sounds great. I've been a cannabis user for 30 years or so. And I originally started for the reason you said. You know, it was a party thing and I liked smoking. I never really took to alcohol.
Sure.
And I really enjoyed smoking. It did, you know, I really liked what the effects were, so I just continued on with it.
Right.
And as I got older in life, I continued to use it, but as you said, the stigma was always there.
Yes.
So as a professional, I've owned my own business for almost 22 years. You know, I always had to be very careful.
Right.
I couldn't let anybody know I was using it. Right. I didn't want to smell like it. I didn't want all these, you know, stigmas that go with it. You know, that you're not productive, you're lazy, you're, you know, all these things that you hear about cannabis, which are frankly untrue.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had some time in life where I played sports when I was younger, and then as I got older, I started to do kung fu, and I started to do some fun things.
Yeah,
right.
no doubt.
And probably in my 30s.
Yeah.
And I had some serious injuries during that time.
Right.
And what happened was I ended up having to go on pain meds because I had surgery for my wrist. I had a wrist injury, and I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
So I went to the doctor. He did an X-ray, and he calls me and says, "Your wrist is actually broken."
Whoa.
And I said, "Okay." And he said, "You need to get to a surgeon right away." I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, it's the scaphoid bone." And he said, "That bone can actually die. And if it dies, you're in a lot of trouble." And I said, "Okay." So I went to the surgeon. The surgeon told me he was going to take a bone graft, put it in the middle, put a screw in, that should spur the bone, and you should be fine. Sounds great.
All right.
Tells me once I get out of surgery, I'll go into occupational therapy, everything will be great. Okay, great. So we go into surgery, I come out, and my wife's standing there, and she says, "The doctor's going to, you know, have you come back on Monday to put a cast on." And I said, "I thought I wasn't going to have to wear a cast." And she said, "Well, he told me that your wrist was broken between 5 and 7 years."
What?
And
You
I
tolerated a broken wrist for almost 7 years?
Again, I used a lot of cannabis.
Dude, that's intense. That is intense.
It was intense, Joe, because when I found that out, I realized, wow, you know, all these things I was doing, you know, and I thought that I needed, you know, medication for this. Or, I really didn't.
Right.
You know, I was tolerating a broken wrist. I was walking around doing life.
Doing
with a
kung
broken,
fu with a
doing kung fu with a broken wrist. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
hardcore.
So I go, you know, he puts the cast on, he takes, you know, go get out, and I'm supposed to go to occupational therapy. But I didn't go to occupational therapy for about 8 months.
Wow.
Because he said the bone wasn't really growing well, and that the screw could pop out, and we would be in trouble if that happened.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I said, okay. So I took my time. After about 8 months, still in excruciating pain.
Oh my gosh.
And at that time now, I'm starting to get on the painkillers. I'm taking the anti-anxiety medications, the Valiums, the Xanax, and I'm not enjoying it, but it's working to a degree.
Sure.
But I did notice when I started to use cannabis in the edible form that I needed a lot less medication.
Interesting.
And it just happened. I stumbled upon that.
Right.
I was just using cannabis, and I never really liked smoking cannabis. I liked the effects.
Right.
But I didn't really like smoking it. So I started to understand how to make it myself, make a product. And so I made my own products, and I started using that in the edible form, and that's when I noticed that I wasn't taking as much pain meds. So I was still taking the meds though.
Sure.
And after quite a while, I got to the point where I said, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, no way.
And it's just too much, right? So again, cannabis is natural.
Right.
Medications aren't.
No.
So I was always happy with the natural way.
Right.
So now I'm saying to myself, I have to get off this.
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore.
No.
And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe if I use cannabis more, maybe if I figure something out, a little healthier alternative with cannabis, that'll help.
Right.
Well, I go to an integrative doctor. I really work on my diet first.
Yep.
Get my absorption rates up. And as I'm doing that, I'm saying, I'm getting off. I'm going to do this.
Wow.
And so I slowly but surely started to get off the medications.
That's impressive.
And Joe, I got off everything.
Wow.
And I owe that, number one, God,
Right.
but number two, cannabis.
Wow.
Because when I got my absorption up and I was taking in that cannabis and it was absorbing in my body,
Right.
I didn't need the pain meds.
Wow.
I didn't need the Xanax. I didn't need that stuff.
That's wild.
And I was still doing it illegally, right?
Right.
Until a friend of mine who's my doctor, he was able to get me my medical license in New Jersey.
Right.
And that really changed everything.
Right. Right. Right.
That really made me feel comfortable that I could use this legally now.
Right. You're being prescribed.
Being
this.
prescribed
Right,
cannabis. And to this day, I take nothing.
That's wild. I mean, there is an insane opioid epidemic in the country, and people have the hardest time getting off of those things, even if it's one prescription.
True.
You were on multiple.
Multiple.
And just weaned yourself off from
Pretty
utilization
much.
of cannabis.
Yes, pretty
That's-
much. I mean, I listen, Joe. I tell anybody who's going to do this, do it slowly.
Yeah.
Right. I knew that I needed to get off, but I was on for so long that I said I have plenty of time.
Right.
It's not a big deal. I'll
Right.
take my time, and I did. I took my time, and I weaned myself down. But once I got off, there was this power that I felt.
Yeah.
It was amazing to get off those medicines. And I remember going to one of my doctors, and he asked me, "So you still taking this?" I said, "No, I'm not." He goes, "What about this?" I said, "No." He looks up, and then by the third one, he goes, "What about this?" I said, "No, I'm off." He goes, "All right, what's going on?"
Yeah. What are you really doing?
He
Yeah,
goes, "How?"
Right.
He said, "There's an epidemic of 2 out of these 3 medications, and you were able to get off of them."
Right.
And I said, "Well,
Simultaneously.
Doc." Simultaneously.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, Doc, I use cannabis." And I said, I'm a little bit ashamed to say it because it's not legal. He goes,
Right,
"Well, that's all right. If that's what worked, they're better than what you were using."
Yeah.
And so at that point, he said to me, "I suggest you go around and start speaking on this topic and trying to help people with that."
Wow.
And so that's kind of been my mission, Joe. It's
Yeah,
kind of been my passion, is to show people that cannabis isn't that drug, isn't that, that stigma that you hear.
Right.
It's more, if you use it properly,
Yes.
it's a medicine.
Right.
It's a natural remedy
Right.
that people should be using.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, right? Because I feel like people, and even myself, when we spoke on the phone prior to the show, was you mentioned cannabis, and I'm like, okay, like how are we going to make this work for the show?
Sure.
But you've never wavered from like you don't call it weed, you don't call it herb or anything like that. You say, hey, this is cannabis. You have a level of respect for it that I don't think I've ever seen somebody have. Like I have friends who use it recreationally, and whatever, that's fine. That's their decision. But no one I've ever met has treated it with such respect like you do, and you keep it in this realm of like, how can I use this as almost like a tool, like a medicine, like you said, to make my life better, myself better, without abusing it, which I think is very special. And I feel like there is so much to be done with this for things beyond just pain management, right? I know, like I've heard usage for like veterans, right, coming back from combat and helping them with PTSD and things like that. I mean, hell, it grows in the ground. Like, why can't we just figure out a way? And we are, I guess, slowly but surely. And you can help educate us.
Right, sure.
But figure out a way to make it so that it is more readily available and can be used in a prescriptive manner, right? Versus saying, hey, you have to go find it on the street legally or something like that. So talk to us, Mark, a bit about like now you're speaking on it. So who are you getting in front of to help educate and like get the word out?
Well, so first I want to thank you for what you said about me respecting the plant, because that's a big part of why I'm in this industry.
Yes.
Is because I recognize the power of cannabis, and I won't call it weed, and I won't call it the other things, because that has a derogatory, connotation to it. Where I don't look at it as derogatory; I look at it as a positive, right? So, how am I speaking to people? Well, I speak to people every day, and when they tell me they can't sleep, when they tell me they have knee pain, or because listen, I'm an old, a little bit older, so I'm coming across people in that realm, and so people in my age level, so struggle from sleep, struggle from anxiety, and someone had once said to me, they said, I understand the medical side of cannabis, but I can't really understand the recreational side of it.
Okay.
And I said, well, the recreational side of it really is medical. I said, just like people use alcohol to sleep, to get rid of their worries, right? I said, that's why people really use cannabis. I said, but cannabis is natural. Cannabis is a plant. Cannabis is an herb, right, that we use naturally, whereas alcohol, not so much. Cannabis actually heals the body, where alcohol, not so much, right? So I have a deep respect for it and for what it's done for me. So who do I speak to, Joe? I speak to anybody who will listen.
I can appreciate that, for sure.
I do. I speak to people on a regular basis when they tell me, oh, I heard this, or I said, well, trust me, this works. The key here, and when you talk about the veterans and you talk about people who can use cannabis, the key is that I don't say, well, if someone comes to me and says, well, you know, how do I use cannabis? Or I heard you can get off medications with cannabis. It's not go smoke a joint and you'll get off medications. Right? I think for me, the key was using it as an edible. Using it in a dosed form, right? Not so much going out and smoking joints and saying, all right, I'm off my medicines, right? You really have to be diligent about how you use it. And that's what I did. I ultimately created my own edible, and I created a granola bar, right? Because it's healthy. I could eat it on a regular basis. And I dosed it accordingly where it was just enough, where it was not as strong as a painkiller, but enough to take the edge off. And that's how I explain it to people. And so what I've done is people say, well, I'd like to try it. I'm going to tell you 9 out of 10 people come back to me and say, that's cannabis?
Really?
They're like, I would have never guessed that it would have those effects. They slept better. The pain went away. Their anxiety is reduced. They're like, I'm not sleeping on the couch. It's not like that. I'm getting a full night's sleep. I haven't done that in years.
Really?
It's a powerful plant. It really is. And I think the derogatory part of it, when people do call it weed or they do, make those comments about it, I think that's what keeps the stigma alive. And I'm really trying to get rid of that stigma.
For sure. And I mean, you're doing an amazing job. So
thank you.
I have a question. So if someone were to, have, and this is just me being uneducated on the topic, so I'm glad I have you here today as the expert. So when it comes to, let's say, like the granola bar you're talking about as an edible, I mean, is that something that's going to inhibit you from being able to function like your normal life, like go to work and drive a car and things like that? Or is it's so low in the dose, so you're only really noticing it as it relates to like your pain or your anxiety and things like that?
That's a great question, Joe. And I'll relate it to this. When I was on pain meds, if it was during the day and I was struggling, it was okay to take a Percocet or a Vicodin because
you're prescribed.
It's legal. But can people really drive on that?
Shouldn't be.
Right? So if the cannabis dosage is proper, which is what I started to do.
That's how you did it,
and I recognized that it was less than that Percocet or that Vicodin that was making me, I was able to function. Now, if you take a big dose of it, sure, I wouldn't say most people can function on it.
Sure.
But I think you have to really find what works. And you try it at nighttime at first. You slowly, gradually get into what works for you. But I think everybody can find that number of milligrams, let's say, that works for them. But the way I look at that is when people say that to me, I was always nervous. I didn't want to take cannabis during the day. But I'll take a Percocet or a Vicodin.
My doctor told me to do it.
That's okay, right? So that's the perception. Is, well, I can't take that during the day. It's gonna. Well, why can you take the other things?
Very true. And as long as you're, I mean, in my opinion, under medical supervision, you're doing it the proper way. It's dose dependent, obviously. You're doing it the right way. What is the difference at that point, right? If you're taking painkillers that your doctor gave you, and your doctor's also telling you to take, or maybe instead of taking cannabis instead,
That's how I look at it, right? Is everybody will be willing to pop a pill because they were prescribed that and it's legal and it's okay. But cannabis is, that's a taboo. You can't use that during the day. You're a burnout. You're this. You're that.
Hippie,
all this,
whatever they want to call you.
All the stigmas, right?
All that stuff.
And so it wasn't easy to break that, but it was probably about 5 or 6 years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago, when I finally got off of everything. I finally said, you know what? I don't care anymore. I don't care what people say, because I'm not on those pills anymore. And so that's a powerful thing. And when you can take that and say, well, I now have a mission, and I have proof of that mission. Then
you just did it.
Then I don't want to have to listen to people tell me, well, you really shouldn't be using it, or this, or the dosage. Well, it worked for me.
Right. You went from a belief to knowing. Like you walked the path, you experienced it. Where most people would say like, well, I don't really believe that stuff's going to work. I don't believe it's the right thing to do. Well, have you applied it in your own life? Have you tried? You only know your experience, right?
Exactly.
So I love where we're going with this. I know there's like a whole, box to
we
unpack.
we
Could
talk
be
for
here all
hours,
day.
Joe.
We're going to take a quick break from our sponsors. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Mark around the topic of cannabis. Hey, it's Coach Joe here, and I want to thank you for checking out this episode of Real Results. Since becoming a coach over a decade ago and getting to help tons of people make incredible transformations, I've made it my mission to find the most effective tools to help people change their health and ultimately their life. As a thank you for watching this episode, I've created a series of free mini courses, downloads, and resources that you can use to create real change in your life. Simply click the link in the description or head over to www.resultswithjoe.com and click on the free resources tab. All you have to do is sign up using your best email address and you'll have access to all the resources straight away so you can start to create real change in your life. I look forward to seeing you on the inside, and let's enjoy the rest of this episode. Welcome back to Real Results. With me today, I've got Mark O'Donnell, and we have been talking about the topic of cannabis as it relates to wellness. And Mark, you've got not only an incredible story, but so many incredible insights and experiences around what I think most would call like a taboo subject. But from your experience, it's been a remarkable tool that's helped you get out of things like being stuck on pain pills.
100%.
Which a lot of this country has a big problem with. And so I'd like to dive right back into that topic. I mean, we've got folks that are stuck in this very unfortunate opioid epidemic. We've got veterans coming back who have, combat traumas and things like that, brain trauma and things. I know even like pets, they're doing CBD with pets.
Sure.
What I'd love to talk about some more from your opinion and your perspective is how can we begin to get this message out a little bit more in terms of educating folks on, hey, this is not like just a drug that you go get high and smoke. It's something that you can use as a tool and as a medicine to help you get off of these other drugs that are really wreaking havoc.
Absolutely. I think one of the main ways to do that is a little bit of more government intervention in the sense of allowing to start to study this, allowing to do some controlled environment studies on I'm preferential to the veterans. I would love to help the veterans. Right? They serve our country. I love our country. I have a high affinity for veterans. So for me to see them coming back after fighting, for our country, fighting for our freedom, and then having these issues of PTSD and pain and all these things, and knowing the power of cannabis, and knowing that they won't get addicted to something. That's where I think maybe the Veterans Affairs, the Veterans Associations can do a little bit more research, can maybe look into it a little bit more, because Joe, honestly, it's legal medicinally in most states in this country. So it's not as if these guys can't be using it legally, right? But I think it's not about saying, okay, smoke a joint and you'll get off of this, or smoke a joint and you won't have PTSD, right? I believe it's studying it so we know how to treat them. And my way of doing it is the way I would most likely like to help them, is to slowly and gradually accept cannabis in the edible form, understand how it works, get the feeling, and then you can slowly decrease your medications, and that will get them off of them, right? So I think anybody on the epidemic scale, I just use veterans because that's, I have a high regard for veterans, right? So, but anybody who could use that help, I would love to help, and I think it comes from maybe the state level or a level where they allow us to start doing some more research.
Definitely, yeah, no doubt. I think education's key, right?
Like it definitely is.
Scientists are out there studying this thing and they know for sure, like, hey, we know without a shadow of a doubt this can help this case or this symptom or whatever, then by all means, like if they can prescribe it legally, like then it's something we can begin to implement more of and get out in circulation.
Well, I can tell you, I mean, I'd be willing to let the scientists look at my medical records.
Yeah, right.
Because it shows what I was prescribed, what my conditions were, and then today.
You'd be like a perfect case study.
That's what I'm hoping, Jeff.
Yeah, you got to bring that folder with you everywhere you go. So Mark, let's talk a little bit about, like, if somebody's watching this right now and they're like, okay, like I think I'm convinced I want to try it. I've never done it before. Like, where should somebody begin on this journey of exploring cannabis to help them with whatever their ailment or hurdle might be?
Well, fortunately now there's dispensaries in New Jersey and throughout the country where there are medical dispensaries and recreational, right? I would suggest if someone's going to try this, they go with the lowest milligram is how they gauge cannabis, 5 milligram, 10 milligram. I would say they go with the lowest milligram first, and they just try to see how that helps them feel. And if they don't feel anything, it's like anything else, right, Joe? It's like any other medication. The doctor gives you a 5 milligram pill, and you're like, Doc, I didn't feel anything. Okay, Joe, well, you need 10 milligrams. So I would treat it the same way. If you're on medication and you go back to the doctor after a month and you say, it's not really working, well, we need to up the dosage. It's the same principle. Start to research it, start to look into some of the edibles, see what the milligrams are. You really don't need over 10 milligrams. I mean, I think between 2 and 5 milligrams is a good number to start for people. I think the 5 to 10 milligram number is where people can start to get off that medication because it's a little bit stronger. But when you start to see 25 milligrams, it's too much. It's not a medical purpose at that point.
So let's say if someone's watching this, they say, well, okay, that sounds great, but I'm not going to dose myself per se. Like where do they typically go to find a doctor who's willing to prescribe this? Is it like your primary care general practitioners nowadays?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, it is. There's several doctors now that do prescribe medical cannabis. The issue there, because one of my good friends is one of those doctors, and he's very knowledgeable about it. But the issue is there's no real dosing. So that's where that studying, that medical research.
We're still early.
We're still early. So it's hard to say that, right? It's hard to tell someone or guide someone where to go. And the other side of it is from the health and wellness. So we just to go back, the reason I make an edible in the form of a granola bar, it's a product that we're gonna release. And the reason I do that is because we use coconut oil. And the way we extract, we get full spectrum. Okay, so we're getting the whole plant. Whereas if you're using a gummy, they're taking it out and they're turning it into just the THC side of it. So you're not getting the whole plant, right? And cannabis in itself, it's not just about the THC. There's terpenes, there's all these good products in the plant where that's really what you need. So we need to be able to get products out there that are healthier for the consumer, which again, we're early, but we're trying to lead the way with that granola bar. We're trying to get out there and get this product into the market because I think it'll really change people's view.
Yeah, you're blazing a trail with all that, which is fantastic. And actually, Jenna Richardson, who's been on the show previously, she's the CEO of Princeton Integrative Health. They mark functional medicine, that kind of stuff. And I think very recently they became, or they have the ability to prescribe, medicinal cannabis for that kind of use. And she was like, it's been something where it's a huge tool in the toolbox now because we know that it helps people, if it's getting off medication or reduce anxiety and things like that, which is amazing. Now, Mark, I'm going to shift gears a little bit because I know cannabis is like such a huge part of your life that you've actually developed businesses and investing around cannabis. So would you mind talking about that a little bit and just kind of opening up about what all you're up to?
So I've had a consulting company for about 22, almost 23 years. And so I've helped raise funds, I've helped to startups, I've helped people do buy-ins and buyouts. That's primarily what we've done. So it was a natural migration into cannabis, right? Because the one thing that we need is we need to raise funds. We need to get a good infrastructure out there. So what we've ultimately did was we created a real estate company that we go out and we purchase the real estate. We built it out for the cannabis licensee, and we help them to fund that because ultimately we'd like to really build the infrastructure of cannabis so that we can get a quality product out there, right? And then on the other side of it, my consulting business, I help bring those products to market. I try to help those guys look at it a little bit healthier, a little bit better of a product, right? With their branding, with their messaging, right? Who do we want to go after, right? There's about 20% of the population, I'd say, who out of 100% of people who use cannabis, there's probably 20 that use the smoking and they like to get high and the bong hits and all that. There's 80% that are either curious, they've used it way back, they know a little bit about it. That's our market. That's who we want to go after. I want to go after the 80% of people who are curious and willing. Because that's who you're going to get to understand the power of the plant. Yeah,
I feel like they probably need their opening, right? Like, hey, this is a healthy option. It's edible. I don't have to smell like it or smoke it or whatever. And here comes Mark with the cavalry to have this granola bar that you've been
Sure.
talking about, maybe
Sure.
would be the product, right?
Yes.
So it's so cool that you're like, I mean, I love when people are passionate about anything, you know, hopefully positive things, right? But in your case, like, you're passionate about it and you're helping to build this whole infrastructure. I mean, you're
That's my
setting
goal.
Up, yeah, you're
That's my
helping
goal.
people create jobs and like really
That's my goal.
push this whole thing forward, which is incredible.
Yeah, I do have a passion for it, and I would like to see it be built properly.
Yeah.
And I'd like to see good products come out.
Yeah, that's a great. It's so great you're playing a role in that. I mean, who knows
you.
in 5-10 years from now where that's going to be? And
Let's hope it's somewhere big, Joe.
fantastic, I love it. So, Mark, we're coming to the end of our time. Do you have any sort of like last minute tidbits? Like, hey, if you're on the fence, you know, like go talk to somebody, check it out, or
I think that's great advice, Joe. I think if you're on the fence about cannabis and you're not sure, I would say there's plenty of articles out there now. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit, and we put out content.
Yeah.
We have content on our website, msollc.com. But LinkedIn has been a great resource because they've allowed people to advertise cannabis.
Right.
And so they come out with a lot of medical articles. So
Very
I would
cool.
suggest people to research it, and then I would speak to a doctor who prescribes cannabis. You can look them up and find a doctor that prescribes cannabis, and kind of go that route and do some research on your own.
Fantastic. So, Mark, where can folks find you if they want to get in touch or learn more about all that you're doing?
So my website's msollc.com. On LinkedIn at Mark O'Donnell. We have Instagram at mso_LLC, and Facebook is the same handle.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure, Joe.
It was my pleasure.
No,
Absolute
this was
blast.
great. I loved it.
Fantastic. You're the man. Awesome. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Real Results.